E-commerce has been booming worldwide over the past decade. More and more goods are being sold online, bypassing traditional retail networks. The leaders in this market are Chinese e-commerce platforms or marketplaces. Their popularity in many countries around the world, including Ukraine, is due to prices that are sometimes several times lower than those of other sellers. The three most well-known Chinese marketplaces are Temu, AliExpress, and Shein. They account for 40% of international parcels with goods. There are a lot of complaints about how these platforms operate. According to the European Rapid Alert System SafetyGate, a significant portion of dangerous goods on the EU market are sold specifically through online platforms. We're talking about cosmetics with excessive levels of harmful substances, children's toys with toxic paints, and electronics with a risk of catching fire. From 2023 to 2025, regulators in France and Germany seized large numbers of electrical appliances ordered through Chinese marketplaces due to non-compliance with CE standards. The global counterfeit market is worth hundreds of billions of dollars annually. According to the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, global trade in counterfeit goods reached $467 billion between 2019 and 2021. China remains the main source of counterfeit goods, accounting for 45% of all recorded seizures. Brands like Nike, Adidas, and Apple point to the sale of fakes through international marketplaces and initiate legal proceedings. Cheap goods are not a 70% discount. They're 100% counterfeit. Chinese apps have become the subject of inspections in the EU regarding compliance with GDPR rules due to aggressive collection of metadata and behavioral information. Complaints have been filed against Chinese tech giants for illegally transferring data to China. And an even more sensitive issue, forced labor. The EU and the US have imposed restrictions on the import of products linked to forced labor in Xinjiang. In 2024, a revolutionary regulation banning products made with the use of forced labor came into effect in the EU. Behind the facade of cheap and fast, there are hidden issues of security, fakes, data, and human rights. Chinese e-commerce platforms also undermine other countries' state budgets by shipping goods on a massive scale through small parcel schemes with understated customs values. The EU has a special regime called Import One-Stop Shop, which allows remote sales of goods worth up to €150 to be taxed with VAT in a simplified manner, even at the stage of purchase. In 2024 alone, 4.6 billion such low-value goods were imported into the EU, which is 11 million parcels every day. 91% of them come from China. In France, in 2025, almost €10 billion in VAT shortfalls were recorded. And among the key reasons, the authorities cite the undervaluation of parcels from e-commerce platforms. In Romania, the annual fiscal losses from direct deliveries from non-European platforms are estimated at about €2.1 billion. And we're talking about multi-billion losses that directly hit the revenues of state budgets. However, it seems the boom times for Chinese e-commerce may be coming to an end. This €150 threshold has been used for years to split shipments into small batches, understate customs value, and avoid full customs procedures and controls. A system that was created to make consumers' lives easier has turned into a huge fiscal filter full of loopholes, allowing unjustifiably low prices to persist. The European Commission directly links the decision to abolish the €150 threshold to widespread abuses through the undervaluation of goods. Due to the explosive growth in the flow of small parcels, the EU has already agreed to a temporary fee of €3 for each such shipment starting in July 2026. So very soon, Chinese manufacturers will have to compete with other suppliers under fairer conditions. Friends, we have an ambitious goal to reach 200,000 subscribers on the channel by the end of 2026. You might have been watching us for a long time and not even realize that you haven't subscribed. Subscribe to our channel and tell your relatives and friends about it. Also, give us a like and leave a comment under this video. We thank all our donors, patrons, and sponsors on YouTube. Every contribution you make brings economic prosperity and well-being closer to Ukraine. After all, we are not just making videos, but informing voters who will choose real reformers. Help us with this. The link to support the price of the state is in the description. Of the 3 largest Chinese marketplaces, only AliExpress is formally Chinese. It is part of the Alibaba Group Corporation, whose headquarters are located in Hangzhou. The founder of the company is businessman Ma Yun, who is better known outside of China by his westernized name, Jack Ma. At the beginning of his career, he was engaged in e-commerce in China. And in 2010, he decided to enter the international market by founding the AliExpress marketplace. Thanks to low prices, the company quickly captured the markets of developing countries such as Brazil, Russia, Eastern Europe, the Middle East, and North Africa, and later, it expanded its activities worldwide. Today, AliExpress is the second most popular e-commerce platform in the European Union after the American Amazon. And in a number of Eastern and Southern European countries, it holds the first place. In Spain, the app is installed on 72.5% of internet-connected devices. In Romania, it's nearly 60%, and in Portugal, it's 50.1%. The platform's total sales volume in 2024 reached $63.9 billion. Another popular Chinese marketplace, Shein, was founded by Chinese businessman Xu Yangqian, better known as Chris Xu, in 2015. The company's headquarters is located in Singapore. Shein specializes in selling so-called fast fashion items. Supporters of this concept prefer to change their wardrobe frequently. They buy currently trendy items at the lowest possible price, and when fashion trends change, they throw them away and buy new, more fashionable ones. Manufacturers of fast fashion items focus on picking up new trends as quickly as possible. They use cheap synthetic materials and don't care much about the quality of the products, since unlike slow fashion items, they are not designed for long-term use. Shein's heyday came during the COVID epidemic in 2020 and 2021. Deprived of the opportunity to go shopping, people started buying things online en masse. Thanks to this, the platform's revenue tripled in just 1 year, from $3.15 billion in 2019 to almost $10 billion in 2020. And by 2024, it reached $38 billion. Today, Shein is the world's largest fast fashion supplier. Its share of the global market is 18 for the Shein app, which has been installed on over 1 billion devices worldwide. The latest sensation in the e-commerce market is Temu. It was created by businessman Huang Zheng, known outside China as Colin Huang. Registered in Ireland, the company entered the United States market in September 2022. And by the end of 2023, the service had 50 million users. The main boost for the company's growth was advertising during the Super Bowl broadcast, the final of the American Football Championship, which took place in February 2024. The Super Bowl is the most popular television event in the world, attracting about 100 million viewers in the United States and another 40 million in other countries around the world. A simple commercial, in which cartoon characters urged viewers to shop like a billionaire, showcased fantastically cheap products: dresses, jackets, sneakers, toasters, coffee tables, and more, all for $9.99. It was aired during the game a total of 5 times. It cost the company $35 million and made many viewers wonder what kind of little-known brand was spending such huge amounts of money on advertising. The next day, the number of internet searches asking, "What is Temu?" increased sharply. A wave of publications appeared, investigating what this generous advertiser was all about. The public response brought almost immediate results. Already in August 24, 2024, just 6 months after the Super Bowl, the number of active users of Temu in the United States almost tripled and reached 185.6 million. And worldwide, it was 292 million. Today, Temu is the second largest e-commerce platform in the world after Amazon. It accounts for 21% of all international shipments with goods. The third place on this list is taken by AliExpress with 10%. The fourth is Shein with 9%. The main reason for the rapid expansion of Chinese platforms in the global e-commerce market is the low price of the products they offer, compared to similar items produced by well-known global brands. For example, original Apple AirPods headphones cost $130 in the United States. At the same time, on Temu, visually similar products can be purchased for $10. There are many reasons for such a radical difference in prices. The Chinese marketplaces themselves claim that the main recipe for success is their business model, which eliminates intermediaries such as wholesale and retail trade from the purchasing process and allows goods to be delivered directly from the factory to the consumer. In addition, they successfully take advantage of the fact that the legislation of most countries exempts low-value parcels from taxes and customs duties, which allows Chinese goods to enter other markets without extra costs. However, there are also other more significant reasons for the low prices. First of all, of course, it is the low quality of the goods. On the websites of public organizations where consumers share their experiences with service, such as reseller ratings, there are a large number of reviews in which consumers complain about the low quality of goods purchased through Chinese platforms, delivery problems, and the indifference of support services. Consumers also send complaints to government agencies. In the first year and a half of Temu's operation in the American market, the Federal Trade Commission received almost 3,500 complaints about the quality of goods and service. Manufacturing experts believe that the main reason for the extremely low prices is the low labor costs. When we see companies selling such a large volume of products at such low prices, it raises a lot of concern, says Melissa Gamble, a fashion researcher at Columbia College, Chicago. We know that it's impossible to produce clothing at such prices and still pay workers even a living wage. All Chinese marketplaces are suspected of selling products made in China's Xinjiang province, which is populated by Uyghurs, a Turkic people who face severe repression in modern China. A significant number of Uyghurs are held in so-called re-education camps, where they are subjected to forced labor, and there are suspicions that goods produced in this way may be sold through Chinese marketplaces. Western countries are trying to prevent goods made with forced labor from entering their own markets. In particular, the United States has the Uyghur Forced Labor Prevention Act, which prohibits the import of goods produced with the involvement of enslaved Uyghurs into the country. However, due to the closed nature of Chinese society, it is very difficult to determine exactly where a product was made. The suffering of a distant Asian people, although it upsets Americans and Europeans, still has little effect on their willingness to buy cheap goods. But there are also other well-founded suspicions that Chinese platforms have a significant impact on the safety of their own consumers. For example, an examination conducted in 2024 by the European Association of Toy Manufacturers found that 95 toys sold on Temu are potentially dangerous for children. There are also numerous questions regarding compliance with digital security regulations. Customers of Chinese marketplaces often complain about privacy violations when using the app. These complaints have become the subject of many lawsuits in the United States. And Guinea Evans, who is filing one of these lawsuits, claims that when a consumer registers, the Temu app asks for permission to access various types of information that are not needed for making purchases online. These permissions include access to information about Bluetooth and Wi-Fi networks, geolocation, as well as the client's biometric data. It can access your phone's camera and microphone, which allows it to collect biometric information, facial images, and voice prints, the lawyer claims. So, when some people feel like their phone is spying on them, that it shows ads for items they only mentioned in private conversations at home. Maybe it's not about paranoia, but about the real business practices of Chinese e-commerce platforms. The American firm Grizzly Research, which investigates illegal activities of private companies, concluded that the Temu app has a full range of such characteristics of the most aggressive spyware. In particular, it has hidden features that allow for large-scale data extraction without the users noticing. Researchers from Grizzly Research have expressed serious suspicions that Temu is already selling or intends to illegally sell stolen customer data from Western countries to increase revenue and support its own business model, which would otherwise be doomed to fail due to unreasonably low prices for goods. Relying on a significant number of similar studies, Arkansas Attorney General Tim Griffin filed a lawsuit against Temu, accusing the company of illegal mass data collection. According to the lawsuit, the Temu app is designed in such a way that its extensive data access remains unnoticed even by experienced users. After being installed on a phone, it can recompile itself and change data privacy settings that users believe they have set. Prosecutors in Nebraska and Arkansas have also filed similar lawsuits against Temu. In fact, the overall level of concern about the company's actions is much higher. In 2024, the Attorneys General of 21 U.S. states wrote a letter to Temu's CEO expressing their concerns about the company's policies, which violate laws on data collection, consumer protection, and the use of forced labor. The concern of the American authorities is not only related to the fact that illegally collected information about citizens is used for intrusive advertising and can be sold to fraudsters. Chinese law requires every resident of the country to provide any information they have to the government upon request. And even if Shein and Temu are registered abroad, their Chinese owners are subject to these laws. Thus, the data of millions of foreign citizens is fully accessible to the Communist Party of China and can be used to influence other countries. For example, for disinformation campaigns on social media aimed at deepening divisions and fueling civil conflicts. Temu firmly rejects all claims from law enforcement, insisting that its business practices are completely legal and that all accusations are insinuations from competitors. The company, sparing no expense on lawyers, defends itself in court, systematically delaying the proceedings and demanding that the cases be closed. The courts reject these demands, but this allows Temu to buy time. The current course of the proceedings indicates that decisions on these cases will not be made anytime soon. Questions about Chinese marketplaces and their handling of buyers' data arise not only in the US. For example, in September 2025, the French National Commission on Information and Liberty investigated Shein's unfair practices regarding the placement of cookies. These are files that websites place on consumers' devices. They allow tracking a person's actions, studying their preferences, collecting statistics on visits and purchases, and so on. European legislation sets the rules for placing these essentially spy files. In particular, they cannot be installed on a device without the owner's consent. And if they are installed, the user must have the ability to configure these files. The investigation showed that the Shein app installed some cookies responsible for placing ads immediately upon the first visit to the site, without the device owner's consent or notification. Later, the user was still presented with a pop-up window to give consent for the placement of cookies. However, they did not comply with the requirements of European legislation. The first one contained only one button, Agree. The consumer was deprived of the opportunity to refuse. The second offered buttons to refuse or customize cookies. However, investigators found that even when the user refused, the site still placed cookies on the device. For these violations, Shein was fined 150 million euros. Chinese marketplaces are also accused of being too lax with other people's intellectual property. Fast fashion manufacturers prefer not to spend time or money developing their own designs. Their tactic is to borrow ready-made designs from other manufacturers, without paying attention to such details as copyrights. Soon after trendy models appear on the runway or at presentations, buyers find very similar, almost identical products from Chinese sellers at prices that can't be compared to the originals. For example, a replica of the popular Adidas Samba sneakers is offered on Shein for 62.29 euros, while the original costs 120 euros. Similarly, you can find copies of products from other well-known brands on the platform: Puma, Nike, Ray-Ban, Calvin Klein, at prices 2 to 3 times lower than the originals. Research conducted by independent laboratories and enthusiasts shows that such products are noticeably inferior to the originals in terms of quality. However, fast fashion enthusiasts do not expect high quality. Manufacturers around the world are naturally outraged by such activities, because it's not only about disrespect for their intellectual property, but also about reduced profits, since many buyers prefer counterfeits. They complain that Chinese companies are massively stealing their designs, using both espionage technologies and artificial intelligence for this purpose. In the United States alone, about 100 lawsuits have been filed for copyright infringement. Among the plaintiffs are well-known brands such as For Love and Lemons, Victoria's Secret, H&M, Ralph Lauren, the Italian eyewear manufacturer Oakley, and others. The Wall Street Journal reports on more than 50 pending cases. There are also claims and moral concerns about marketplaces. For example, in 2025, the French Directorate General for Competition, Consumer Affairs, and Fraud Control found that the Shein website was offering sex dolls with childlike appearances. The high-profile scandal sparked large protests in Paris and forced the European Commission in February 2026 to launch an in-depth investigation into Shein's activities in the distribution of prohibited goods. Such an investigation may take years, but if guilt is established, Shein faces a fine of 6% of its total annual revenue. For example, in 2024, the platform's sales volume reached $48 billion. 6% of that amount is $2.9 billion. Ukraine has its own score to settle with Chinese marketplaces. In 2023, the National Agency for the Prevention of Corruption included Alibaba Group in the list of international sponsors of the war. The reason was AliExpress's active operations in the aggressor country, censorship of Ukrainian content, and providing a platform for selling goods from Ukrainian territories occupied by Russia. However, appeals to law and ethics have little effect on buyers' behavior. All doubts are in their minds. Chinese marketplaces respond to integrity and honesty with only one argument: their pricing policy. And as it turns out, this works perfectly. The experience of Shein has shown that the average consumer, when choosing between low prices and a company's reputation, chooses low prices, says Dr. Daphne Grigoriadi, a lecturer at the business school of Aegean College in Greece. The flood of Chinese packages is causing concern not only because of violations of data security or intellectual property laws. It negatively affects the development of local entrepreneurs, the country's economic situation, and the public finances of other countries because marketplaces cleverly bypass tax barriers. Most countries have in their legislation the so-called de minimis rule. The law does not bother with trifles. According to this rule, low-value parcels coming from abroad, although formally considered imports, are not subject to value-added tax and customs duties. The existence of such a rule is understandable. The state deliberately does not apply tax legislation to small quantities of goods received in parcels, because the money collected in this way would not cover the additional administrative costs. Under the de minimis rule, the United States exempted parcels valued up to $800 from taxation, Australia up to $495, Japan up to $47. In the European Union, parcels valued up to 150 euros are not taxed. In Ukraine, the same rule applies as of today. For decades, this tax exemption had almost no impact on state budgets, since it mostly applied to gifts that people sent to relatives living abroad. But the development of e-commerce has changed the situation. Chinese entrepreneurs realized that this legislative loophole could be used by selling inexpensive goods directly to consumers, thus avoiding taxation. Because of Chinese marketplaces, the number of parcels has grown explosively. According to the United States Congressional Research Service, in just 5 years, from 2018 to 2023, the total value of parcels delivered to the U.S. increased nearly 13 times, from $5.3 billion to $66 billion. In 2024, de minimis parcels made up 92% of all shipments that arrived in the U.S. from abroad. At the same time, 73% of them came from China. Similar trends are observed in Europe as well. According to the European Commission report, in 2022, 1.4 billion parcels arrived in the countries of the European Union. In 2023, it was 2.3 billion. In 2024, it was 4.6 billion, and in 2025, it was 5.8 billion. 91 of them came from China. Along with the increase in the number of parcels, the losses for state budgets are also growing. In addition, goods arriving by mail reduce local retail sales, which also leads to lost tax revenue. Parcels are also often used to transport prohibited goods. According to the White House, 98 drugs, 77 health hazardous goods, and 97 items that violate intellectual property rights intercepted at the border were seized specifically from parcels. Thus, for many countries, it has become clear that parcels from China are no longer a minor issue that the law can ignore. In 2025, a number of countries tightened customs regulations, closing legal loopholes for duty-free import of goods in the form of small parcels. U.S. President Donald Trump, even during his election campaign, promised to put an end to the massive scam of shipping goods in small parcels. Shortly after taking office on May 2, 2025 by executive order, he suspended the de minimis rule, and soon after, Congress passed a big, beautiful law prepared by the White House that abolished this rule forever. For several months during the transition period, a fixed fee of $200 was imposed on each Chinese parcel. And starting in March 2026, customs duties have been collected in the usual manner, depending on the value of the goods contained in the parcel. At the moment, for most Chinese goods, the duty rate is 54%. Other countries followed the example of the United States. Last year, Brazil and South Africa abolished the de minimis rule. Japan is preparing to make the same decision. The European Union has also announced its intention to introduce taxation on parcels. On November 25, 2025, the finance ministers of the EU countries gathered to discuss how to stop marketplaces from abusing the import one-stop shop benefit. We see our market being filled with more and more junk that does not meet quality standards, consumer protection, or environmental requirements, and also creates cheap competition, said German Finance Minister Lars Klingbeil. That's why it's good that together with the EU, we have finally started addressing this problem and intend to change the situation quickly. However, compared to the hectic activity of the American president, the pace of implementing changes in the European Union is not impressive. The ministers agreed that just like the Americans, they will first introduce a fixed fee for every parcel arriving from outside the EU, regardless of its value. This fee will be charged starting from July 1, 2026, and will amount to €3 for each category of goods. For example, if a parcel contains 2 silk blouses, you will have to pay €3 for it. But if one is silk and the other is wool, it will be €6, because these items have different customs codes. This system will operate for at least 2 years, while a single EU customs data center is being established. By the way, we talked about it in the video The Secret of EU Wealth, how the single customs system made Europe a trade giant on the Cena Derzavi channel. When it comes into effect, instead of a fixed fee on parcels, customs duties and VAT will be charged depending on their value. It is expected to happen on July 1st, 2028. As a result, the cost of goods from Chinese marketplaces will increase by 20 to 40%, and delivery times will also get longer. Returning goods will also become less attractive, since the duties and taxes paid on imported goods will not be refunded. Thus, Chinese platforms will lose a significant part of the competitive advantages that currently allow them to capture the European market, which includes 450 million consumers. Ukraine is not on the sidelines of global trends. In our country, the so-called de minimis rule also applies, according to which parcels worth up to 150 euros are not subject to either customs duties or taxes. And thanks to this, the number of parcels from Chinese marketplaces is rapidly increasing. If during 2022 and 2023, 61.5 million parcels worth up to 150 euros were imported into Ukraine, then in 2024 alone, their number reached 76 million. The total value of goods delivered by parcels in 2024 reached 123 billion hryvnias. Moreover, 82 of them came from China. Due to the absence of VAT and customs duties on these imports, the state budget of Ukraine lost 11.8 billion hryvnias in 2024 and 17.9 billion in 2025. And in 2026, the losses could reach 27 billion hryvnias. In Ukraine, there is also a discussion about revising the rules for taxing international postal shipments in order to eliminate opportunities for abuse of the minimum value threshold for parcels. It's not just about the need to increase state budget revenues, but also about harmonizing national legislation with EU law, which in 2026 will effectively abandon the use of the de minimis rule. 2 draft laws have been submitted to the Verkhovna Rada, number 12,429 and 12,442. They provide for amendments to the customs and tax codes. The documents propose introducing a 20% VAT for all imported parcels, regardless of their value. To simplify administration, the possibility is provided for foreign marketplaces to register as VAT payers in Ukraine, with automatic tax payment when selling goods to Ukrainian consumers. An exception is proposed only for shipments valued up to 45 euros that are sent between individuals. In this case, VAT is not charged. At the same time, the draft laws provide for the retention of the de minimis rule regarding customs duties. Customs duties would not apply to parcels valued up to 150 euros. As of today, both draft laws were registered on January 25, 2025, and are currently listed as available for review. That is, a substantive parliamentary review has not actually begun. Given the recent changes in customs regulation in the EU, certain provisions of the draft laws already require updating. In particular, for full harmonization with European practice, Ukraine will have to consider the possibility of introducing a fixed customs fee for parcels valued up to 150 euros. Supporters of no restrictions on Chinese shipments say that smartphones and other electronics, which can be ordered from Chinese marketplaces, are not produced in Ukraine. Therefore, these restrictions are nonsense and harmful to the end consumer. Thanks to the absence of VAT and customs duties on parcels worth up to 150 euros, one individual can import goods worth up to 4,500 euros per month free of charge. A group of 10 people can import goods worth tens of millions of hryvnias per year. This scheme is actively used by Ukrainian dealers. This creates non-competitive conditions for Ukrainian manufacturers who are forced to pay VAT. Besides electronics, Ukrainians most often buy clothes, shoes, cosmetics, household goods, toys, stationery, and handicraft materials through international parcels. That is, everything that is produced in Ukraine. There are already 20,000 clothing and footwear manufacturers in Ukraine, 200 toy manufacturers, and hundreds of household goods producers. and it is they who suffer from duty-free imports. That is, goods from Ukrainian manufacturers are subject to VAT and customs duties in China, but Chinese goods in Ukraine, for some reason, are not. The Chinese, through these loopholes and low-quality, dangerous products, are destroying Ukrainian businesses, depriving Ukrainians of jobs and salaries, and also taking currency out of Ukraine, which negatively affects the hryvnia exchange rate. If tax benefits for the Chinese are cancelled, it will create fair competitive conditions for Ukrainian businesses. For the budget, it means an additional 27 billion hryvnias in 2026. For the country, it means stimulating production, integration into the EU, and economic development. This is not a new tax, but a leveling of the playing field. Unfortunately, the members of the Verkhovna Rada are playing into the hands of the Chinese and do not want to vote for the elimination of tax exemptions for parcels worth up to 150 euros. More and more countries are realizing the systemic risks associated with the activities of Chinese e-commerce platforms and are taking active regulatory action. Countries are revising the rules for tax exemption of small parcels, strengthening customs and tax administration, and requiring foreign sellers to pay taxes under the standard rules. At the same time, investigations are underway regarding product safety, production conditions, as well as the compliance of marketplaces with legislation in the areas of advertising, competition, and personal data protection. Despite the fact that reforms in this area are only at an early stage, their impact is already noticeable. After the de minimis rule for certain categories of imports was abolished in the United States in May 2025, the volume of small international shipments sharply decreased. According to available estimates, the daily flow of parcels decreased by about 85% from around 4 million to 600,000 per day. This has already had a noticeable impact on the capitalization of Chinese marketplaces. For example, the market value of Shein has decreased threefold, from $90 to $30 billion. Such a sharp decline forced some owners to sell their shares at a reduced price, and the company itself cancelled the planned offering of additional shares on the London Stock Exchange. In the coming years, Chinese marketplaces will face a wave of fiscal and regulatory pressure. Increased tax burdens, stricter customs controls, tougher requirements for personal data protection and product safety are gradually dismantling the model built on cheap parcels and regulatory loopholes. They will have to play by the rules, not outside them. This means higher costs, tougher competition, and a slowdown in the pace of conquering global markets. The era of duty-free boxes and a dumping assault on global trade is already changing. So, when you shop online on Temu, AliExpress, or Shein, know that this is a new form of economic expansion that needs to be gotten rid of. Every purchase there is support for the hostile country of Communist China, whose goal is to destroy local businesses around the world and impose debt bondage on countries. Thanks to Atlas Network support, this video was made possible. The opinions of the video authors do not necessarily reflect those of Atlas Network.